Welcome, everyone, to Color Commentary. We are your Pauper commentators, Michael Petrick and Adrian Gonzalez. How's it going, Adrian?
It's pretty good, Mike. How are you?
Good. You had the last week off. I'm glad to have you back. I've missed listening to your lovely voice.
Good to be back.
On this wonderful evening. It's nice and warm outside. I got almost nothing to complain about. But let's take care of upkeep stuff, and we can get into this episode. First, we are brought to you, as every week, in part by Original Magic Art. They have a variety of tokens, dice bags, playmats, and art prints from throughout the history of Magic and the history of the world at large. And we're affiliates over there, so you can either use the URL originalmagicart.store/commentary or the affiliate code commentary in all caps, both spelled as they are in the name of this podcast, and you'll get a 10% discount off your order, so you can have a nice, fancy-looking play space. Once again, that is originalmagicart.store/commentary or the affiliate code commentary in all caps to let them know that we sent you over there. What do you have for us, Adrian?
Well, we've got a Patreon for just $1 an episode. You too can hear the full show, including our pre and post shows, and get access to our patron-exclusive Discord channel.
And finally, we're brought to you in part by Hipsters of the Coast. They have all sorts of interesting Magic content for a variety of formats, so go ahead and check them out. And if you find something there you like, let them know via social media that we sent you over there so that they know that we're producing good content. All right, Adrian, what are we talking about this week?
This week, Mike, we're talking about Burn. And the reason we're talking about Burn is because there were 3 Burn decks in the top 8 of the most recent challenge. Unfortunately, don't have those challenge lists. As you mentioned in the pre-show, WotC had a snow day, and so the deck lists are not uploaded. So are they running Skewer the Critics? Are they playing Cataxian Probe? We don't know. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over Burn's current place in the metagame and how this deck that we dismissed pretty often on the show has come back in order to take 3 spots in the top 8.
We have we have on occasion perhaps been a little harsh towards Burn. I think recently I referred to it as the world's most okayest metagame deck. And
the reason for that is Burn doesn't really do anything special, right? Like, it's like, how quickly can I count to 20 using in the most efficient manner possible without getting super disrupted by my opponent? It's kind of hard to disrupt Burn because there's so much redundancy in the deck. But at the end of the day, it's sort of a go-kart deck, right? You're just trying to race your opponent and ignore what they do in order to kill them as quickly as you possibly can. I'm not trying to say Burn has no thinking involved, and I'm not trying to say Burn's a deck for dumb people or anything like that. It just typically, in the formats that play it, it's a pillar or a staple, but it's almost never the best deck.
Yeah, it's like a Sandra Bullock deck, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And I think that that's kind of been the way it's been for a long time, especially in our format, and that redundancy is kind of the thing that keeps it alive. And recently they got the little boosts from Skewer the Critics, and depending on which kind of list you're running, some people have been running Gitu Lava Runner, which has been putting up results. We've talked before on the show how we think it might not be the best choice, but we're leaving that at the door today.
Yeah, because as of now, it's definitely the most ubiquitous choice. Everyone is running that card.
Yeah, it seems to have shaken out, and so today we're going to try and pinpoint what exactly has changed about the metagame to allow this deck that does put up kind of mainly reasonable, okay results to have almost half of the top 8 represented with this one archetype. So let's get started by talking about the other big decks in the metagame. So
go ahead. There's 2, right? Like, realistically, there's 2.
Mm-hmm.
There's Boros, and there's Blue-Black Delver, and then there's some other decks.
Yeah, I'd say like Tron in a reasonably distant third.
Yeah, it used to be, and we've heard us talk on the show, that Tron's a pillar of the format. Still probably the case, but definitely not putting up the results. In fact, if we check Goldfish, which I know is flawed, but it is our best method for checking this sort of thing, the top 4 decks are Boros, Blue-Black Delver, Blue-Black Delver. Huh.
So if you dedupe that list, does Tron actually crack the top 4?
I mean, yes, Tron's the next one.
Okay, so yeah, it's still there, but it's, we're talking about a pretty significant difference in metagame share. Like, Boros makes up about 28%, 30% of the metagame. Blue Black Delver makes up about 18 of that, and then Tron comes in at 7%.
Right.
So yeah.
So yeah, our normal discussion of the pillars is definitely needs to be updated by saying Tron is now a distant third compared to the other two decks. It's not even close.
Yeah. So with Boros, the things that helped it stay alive against Burn were, I think in large part the fact that it could present a reasonably fast clock, which is always important against Burn style decks. It also benefited from the fact that it has access to both prismatic strands and life gain. And it mainly got its life gain in the form of a combination of Radiant Fountain, the colorless land that gains you 2 life when it enters the battlefield, and Lone Missionary. It also incidentally gets to run the gain lands, which are just kind of free as far as our format's considered. But Adrian, what has happened with these sort of easy life gain sources?
Well, I took a look at some of the Boros lists, and they're just not running Radiant Fountain anymore. Sure, you still have Windscarred Crag, and you still have the Prismatic Strands, but I'm not even really sure how important gaining that two life was. I mean, against Burn, 2 of those negates 1 burn spell, but yeah, it's interesting that Burn was able to take 3 places in a challenge. What was the rest of that top 8?
What was the rest of that top 8? Give me just a second here. We had Boros Monarch, Boros Bully, Blue Black Delver, Hexproof, and Is It Delver.
That's really interesting to me because I don't think any of those decks have a particularly bad burn matchup. Certainly not like Is It Delver.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is the fact that like sometimes Burn just rips the better than average lightning bolt alikes, and sometimes like it is one of those decks where it has it's very difficult to interact with it just because it mainly plays on the stack, and you get put in these weird positions where your removal is of variable quality against them because they might not be running that many creatures. So I think there's contributing factors.
And what we sort of discussed is I know you said that Boros presents a reasonable clock. Perhaps the tokens build does, and I think having Sacred Cat with lifelink helps. But, I mean, that deck takes a while to set up. A Burn deck could realistically do like 9 to 12 damage to a Boros deck before they're finally able to start countering spells in their own way. Also, some of the more efficient answers, like the deck doesn't have like Hydroblast, for example, is what I'm getting at. Whereas the Blue-Black Delver list does. And so one of the things we were discussing a little bit before the show is that we think that Burn was able to squeak in because some of the changes that Boros and Blue-Black Delver have sort of made to fight each other. Would you say that that's accurate, Mike?
Yeah, I think like we're seeing these minor adjustments being made where, life gain is not as relevant from the tokens player's perspective against like a big Gurmag Angler, because they can chump that thing for days. It's not actually putting up as much pressure as it would be against other decks that don't just have sort of throwaway disposable bodies. And I think that in part these things have been shaved to boost that little sliver of a percent against the other top deck in the format. And I think a group of people just made the very astute call that like, hey, running Burn this weekend is not a bad idea. I do want to address, though, this was a kind of small challenge. This was only 57 people. And if you want to think of Burn as like, and again, we're not trying to disparage how difficult the deck is to play, but like Burn is a bit more of a coin flippy deck than some others. And by that, I mean like sometimes Burn is just going to win off of its top decks, and sometimes it's going to brick and hit a bunch of land and not assemble 20 damage.
I don't think that that's disparaging, Mike. People play plenty of those types of decks in, say, Legacy, and that's just like the nature of the deck. You win the ones you win because that's why people play the deck.
Yeah, like there's a handful of decks that are kind of coin flip decks where even if you're the most skilled pilot, you can still just lose to like a bad top deck or two. And I think that burn fits into that because, as we've talked about before, and I know you don't like this designation, burn's pretty much a combo deck. It's just that it's the loosest combo in that you just need to string together about 7 spells in an order, but it does play out a little bit more combo like. So, obviously we've addressed the fact that this was a slightly smaller challenge that does bring with it different things. It was Super Bowl weekend this week in the US, if anyone is listening from abroad and curious as to why that might be.
It was a Super Bowl weekend everywhere, Mike.
I don't think for some reason that any of our listeners in Europe were exactly jumping out of their seats.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if no one celebrates the holiday, was it really a holiday?
Boxing Day's a holiday.
It is. Do you celebrate it?
No.
You should. It's a good holiday. It gives you time to give back to people. But regardless, we're getting on a tangent here. So basically what we're trying to get at here is red-white shaves a little bit of its interaction, a little bit of its life gain in favor of being able to shore up a very crucial matchup, and in turn kind of gives burn a little tiny bit of an edge, and that's all that deck generally needs.
That's all we needed.
So with blue-black Delver, I think it's much more interesting actually to see. I just don't think that is an archetype that lines up well against burn even on a good day.
Right, and let's sort of discuss that. So the tools that we have to fight burn are actually not terrible. And hear me out. That's different than what I was telling Mike earlier. So Dispel, good against burn. Counterspell, not great. Daze, pretty okay. Burn tries to execute its game plan in the early turns, although setting you back lane is certainly not good. I think where we really were getting into it not being super... Okay, well, hold on one sec. In the sideboard, additional copies of Dispel and then Hydro Blast, of course, is really strong against burn. But I think what we were getting at earlier is that the sort of the marquee cards of the deck, Foil and Snuff Out, are just not very good against burn.
Yeah, you're kind of in this weird place. And also, like, this is a deck running 3 Ataxium Probe. That's something I do also want to touch on. But, like, Snuff Out is the main piece of removal that you have access to. And it hits you for 4 life, so you get to remove one of their creatures, and they get a free bolt plus out of it.
Yeah, and I mean, Snuff Out is good against 90% of decks in the format, non-black decks and non-burn decks. But I mean, like we said earlier, that could just be the opening that Burn's looking to capitalize on a blue-black dominated field. The other thing that we sort of talked about is that Burn doesn't care as much about the raw card advantage generated by both of these decks. They're just looking to kill you. And if it takes you 4 turns to play your Monarch card, that's cool. I hope you can draw a way to interact.
Yeah, it just kind of has all these minor things that line up well. Like, for example, one of the things that Blue-Black Delver has been slotting into the main deck has been Cursive Chains. Like, what part... Like, Gitu Lava Runner doesn't like Cursive Chains, but if you're running Firebrand Archers or Thermo Alchemists,
yeah.
like Thermo Alchemist is actually pretty unaffected by Cursive Chains because you just tap it in response to the trigger.
And for what it's worth, I like Thermo Alchemist more than Firebrand Archer, simply because if you are hellbent, you can keep activating Thermo Alchemist, and that is not true for Firebrand Archer.
Yeah, I think the other thing that Thermo Alchemist now has is the fact that out of all of the removal in the Blue-Black Delver deck, like, we're talking about 2 Echoing Decays, 3 Snuff Outs, and a Curse of Chains. Just from the sample deck that I pulled up here, that's like their main board. So Curse of Chains, as we discussed, like, you can just cast stuff and untap the Thermo Alchemist if you really need to. You also just get a free activation out of it. Echoing Decay, you've got to hit both copies of it on a Thermo Alchemist to actually remove one of them. Now, granted, if they have another one out, like, that's pretty reasonable. Like, if you have to blow 2 Echoing Decays to kill 2 Thermo Alchemists, I feel okay about that. But if they only have one, like, that's a really bad proposition. Or you Snuff Out, killing this thing, and basically giving your opponent 4 free activations of it in the process.
Right.
Like, that isn't a great option here. Like, and I'm looking in the board, and like another Curse of Chains again, like is okay, but Shrivel's not doing much. Gutshot's not doing much. And most of these creatures can just kind of sit there and not attack. The exception is obviously Gitu Lava Runner, which does very much have to still turn sideways and get in. But I just don't think that this deck is one that is very well tuned in the current state against the simple plan of I'm going to do damage directly to you. Answer this or you're done.
Did you just almost say that in a baby voice?
In a what voice?
A baby voice?
No. I was
I'm
not
gonna do 20 damage to you.
Again, like we're not trying to ride on burn players here. Like I enjoy playing burn when I get a chance, but
Yeah, I'm a big Mono Red fan, but I was like Mike the shade.
like that is the thing. Like I enjoy playing burn because it is very subtly complicated, and that I think is the best way to put it. Like your decisions matter a lot more in a deck like that because ideally you're not carrying that many cards deep. Like you're not really trying to make the game go long. You're just trying to point bolts at your opponent's face and remove any creatures that you absolutely have to. And I think that's the other thing. Like looking at Blue Black Delver, like Delver Secrets, yes, that is definitely a problem. Augur of Bolas isn't doing anything to you, and you're not having a bunch of creatures get blocked by it in some builds. Stormbound Geist, again, like is okay, but you're not going to hit that with removal. You're not going to waste a burn spell on it and turn it into a 3/3. And Gurmag Angler, yes, it's big, but it does actually require some work to get there.
Obviously, the other great benefit to burn is that it's cheap. That's why another reason people play it. It's like $12 on Moto.
Yes. Burn has always been one of the cheapest decks in the format. And it is a really great place for people to kind of enter the format through because actually it's gone up a little bit. I'm checking online and oh wait, hold on. I was in black red discard. Never mind. Hold on. Let's buffer this one. Okay, yes, it is $12.
That's a pretty exciting deck that's popped up recently, but we won't talk about that now. And in fact, dedicated burn decks, maybe not the greatest like we discussed, but the Monarch decks, the Boros decks do typically have burn as like a plan B just because they have access to powerful cards like Galvanic Blast.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that I'm just seeing here is the fact that like burn does not care as much about interaction, and these two main decks have focused on like how can I interact with this other big deck, and burn is just kind of going, okay, cool. The two of you have made decisions that happen to line up poorly against my game plan. I'm just going to slip in here and, do what I'm going to do. Now, looking through some of like the recent burn lists, is there anything in here that you think like, again, burn does not change that much week to week, but I'm not seeing anything in here that looks super, super revolutionary. We did see a couple of Skewer the Critics decks, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah, that's the only thing. That's what I was going to say exactly.
Although, actually, I am noticing Martyr of Ashes in a sideboard. I think that's pretty interesting.
I think people have... Well, it's not very good against Delver, but it's good against Gurmag Angler.
But is it, like... By the time you get an Angler out, like, do you still have 5 cards in hand?
That's true. I guess it's good... All right, fine. I guess it's good versus tokens then, Mike.
Yeah. Like I think that's probably where it's best. Like just the fact that it is a variable size electricity style effect is nice. Like if your opponent has a really fast start and you just need to kill a bunch of stuff dead, like sure, this gets the job done. The one thing that I'm still curious about is Curse of the Pierced Heart. Is that still fast enough? Like, I get that it's really sticky and, like, you probably need a sideboard card to take care of it, but it seems a little slow in this day and age.
It's not the best anymore, I would say. And it's also, I mean, I guess we can talk about this later. It's a non-bow with Skewer.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we did point that out in our set review. But I think it is really interesting to see the resurgence of a deck that for a long time has kind of fallen to the wayside, and seeing it sort of sneak in here when the metagame is right and take a couple of high ranking spots in a challenge is really interesting. Do we want to perhaps move into the combat step and then continue this conversation afterwards?
Sure. Howdy, do we have some questions today? The first question, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
It's an age-old question. Which mythological creature do you personally relate more to, and why? The noble, majestic centaur, or the cowardly and craven satyr? No bias.
The cowardly and craven satyr. We're not gonna go off the deep end of my deep love of Greek myth, but I guess a centaur because they're taller. I don't know.
That's interesting. I actually honestly relate more to satyrs. They just want to party.
Yeah, and like that's kind of not my jam. Like I mostly stay home. I do not lead a very like high energy like wild life. I generally tend to like things pretty quiet. So like yeah,
you want to go tend to your fields of grain.
Yeah, like I want to go chill in the woods and like not have to worry about that stuff.
Perhaps pluck a lyre.
Well, lyres are bad musical instruments, but again, we're not gonna get into these opinions.
Why is that?
They got too few strings.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize your advanced centaur playing techniques necessitated more strings.
I mean, it's just not a very interesting instrument. But I said we weren't getting into it because I've got I've got a question for you, and your combat step, choosing between one or the other, is too popular. I was going to do a meat-based question, but then I realized you are in fact a vegetarian. So I went with tofu, which is processed soybean curd, or seitan, which is wheat gluten that is somehow processed to look and feel like meat. And now, I don't know how that works.
Mike, these are both good. I understand that you probably have not had much experience with seitan.
I actually have. I'm a big fan of it.
Well, I am also a big fan of seitan. I'm going to pick seitan here. Hail seitan. It is delicious, and it is hearty, and it is much more like meat than most meat substitutes.
Yeah, it manages to get that like weird, the very specific texture right. I don't know.
Also, shout out to tempeh, which is also delicious.
Oh, I maybe I've only ever had bad tempeh, but it always just kind of feels like I'm eating like moist styrofoam. I don't know.
Sounds like yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but like the texture, because the soybeans are still kind of intact, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. The texture on that's just not my jam, man.
I like it all.
But yeah, I'm not shocked by that. I'm by no means a tofu fan. I think the consistency of it is usually the determining factor in my mind.
Where can I even buy seitan? It doesn't look like I can buy it at the grocery store.
I would recommend going to a Asian-run grocery store. They tend to have some sort of stuff that's made out of seitan. Highly recommend it. All right, cool. Let's get back into our discussion about burn. So you mentioned it multiple times and held back. So do you want to talk about Skewer the Critics?
Oh, yes, would I, Mike? So Skewer the Critics, for those of you who don't know, is one of the new cards from Ravnica Allegiance. I couldn't remember the name of the set for a second. It's 2 in a red, deal 3 damage to any target, but it has the new Rakdos keyword Spectacle. So Spectacle means you may cast a spell for a spectacle cost rather than its mana cost if your opponent lost life this turn, and it is R. So functionally turns into chain lightning without giving your opponent the ability to throw it back at you. So the reason this is a non-bow with Curse of the Pierced Heart is because that triggers on your opponent's upkeep, and so since this is a sorcerer, you'll never get to enjoy the benefit of that. So what you could do on turn 2, for example, is you could bolt and then play Skewer, or you could play your Thermo Alchemist. It plays really well with Thermo Alchemist because you can tap to ping to trigger the ability. So Mike and I thought it would see a lot of play in the burn list simply because it's another deal 3 damage at not really a much more of an opportunity cost.
Yeah, and burn is a deck that will sometimes cast its Rift Bolts, which are I think that's the closest analogous version, because Riftbolt is 3 in a red for deal 3 damage to any target, and it has suspend of a red, so that when you wait a turn on, but you get the discounted price. And like, Burn is a deck that sometimes just casts its Riftbolts when it needs them now, so I don't see there being as big of like.
They're my Riftbolts and I need them now.
Yeah, like I don't think Skewer the Critics is. That's interesting. So, do you think Skewer the Critics? What do you think Skewer the Critics' average mana cost is in Pauper Burn? Like, if you were trying to sort it as either a 1, a 2, or a 3,
I think it's 1.
You think it's closer to 1. So you think that on average, more than like 70, more than 50% of the time, or more than 75% of the time, you're casting this for 1 instead of 3.
Yes, and here's why. Let's say my turn 1 is Gatu Lava Runner.
Mm-hmm.
That Skewer is going to be cast for 1. Let's say my turn 2 is Thermo Alchemist. Same deal. Obviously, it is much worse on turn 1, but like if you go turn 1 suspend Riftbolt your opponent, Skewer, like that's a good turn.
Yeah, it does kind of incentivize a weird play pattern, and I've actually been playing with this a reasonable amount in Standard on Arena. It does kind of enable this weird play pattern where if you don't have a repeatable source of easy damage, where you kind of wind up like blowing a bunch of these in one turn, just to kind of make sure that your mana is used as efficiently as possible.
Let's say you somehow have 4 mana, 3 mana, you play a land, you Searing Blaze, you Needle Drop, and then you do the other one.
Skewer?
Skewer. Yeah, I was just talking about it. I don't know. I think it sets up some powerful turns where you can do 3 additional damage you might not be able to do otherwise. That being said, we've sort of discussed how Curse of the Pierced Heart might even be a little bit slow. Do you just 1-for-1 swap out, and as a combo, do you just 1-for-1 swap out Curse of the Pierced Heart with Skewer the Critics?
I mean, I think that Curse still has play against decks where like the game stalls out, because if the game's going slowly, this kind of presents a continuous clock, but...
Right. It's also good if you sneak it in under like a counterspell, and you cannot dispel Curse of the Pierced Heart. You have to actually counterspell it pre-board, or...
Can't dispel a Skewer the Critics either, though.
That's true. Actually, that might be a really powerful thing going for it, the fact that it can't be affected by dispel.
Yeah. And it's not like we're cutting like one of the premium like instant speed 3 damage spells here either. Now, I guess, how do you feel about Searing Blaze in this deck, given the preponderance of both tokens and a deck that's trying to get to a big old 5/5?
I think Searing Blaze is fine. The reason I think it's fine is because you can clear problematic permanents like Seeker of the Way while still being able to do 3 damage to your opponent. And I do think that is key. I think getting rid of a card specifically like Seeker of the Way is good.
All right, that's fair. Now, the other thing I want to ask about is Fire Blast. With a deck running around with usually around 7 free counterspells, is this something that you feel comfortable casting?
So that's the thing, right? Foil has changed everything, and the way you gotta sort of analyze this.
Because Fire Blast is the most effective burn spell, right? Like it's quote free, and it deals 4 damage. That's like the best rate.
The most recent 5/0 burn list does have 4 Fire Blast, which is actually a lot more than I think it used to run. I think it only used to run like 2 or 3, because 4 is too many. Like if you draw 4, you're not winning the game.
Yeah, it does put you in a bit of a precarious situation, but the thing that shocks me more is that people are running this while there's a deck running around with, I guess like 4 days is not a guaranteed counterspell, but running around with like 3 copies of foil in the deck. Like even if you've got the Pyroblast in the board, like you don't
It'd be a
have...
huge feel bad.
Yeah, like Blue Black Delver does not care if it's at 4 or less life and you cast a Fire Blast against it. It doesn't care about what it has to do to get out of that situation. Like they're just snapping off that foil. And interestingly enough, I'm looking through a bunch of these lists. I'm not seeing Pyroblasts in the board anymore. Like I'm seeing a much like like I'm seeing like Flaring Pain obviously in there for Prismatic Strands. I'm seeing Martyr of Ashes. I'm seeing Molten Rains, although I'm not sure Molten Rain. Tron is still probably liable to give you a hard time in some matchups, but I'm not sure if Molten Rain is still where you want to be in this day and age. And I'm even seeing like some weird things like Keldon Marauders in the sideboard. So I think it's interesting that we're seeing 4 Fire Blasts and also a complete removal of any way to interact with counter magic.
Yeah.
Looking through some other things, like obviously like Chain Lightning probably still stays in just because it is always 1 mana for 3 damage. The creatures. Let's talk about the creatures. So we've expressed before that we don't think Gitu Lava Runner is the bee's knees or anything like that. But now it's starting to show up in lists that aren't even running the Gitaxian probes to kind of support it into being a bigger creature quicker. So is this just here to stay? Is a sometimes Goblin Guide good enough at this point?
I think the results speak for themselves. Everyone's playing the card. I think it's good enough at this point. It's a good top deck in the late game.
I guess that's true. Like you can, if your opponent has swung out against you, you can just kind of jam this and get in for damage.
Playing it in standard has definitely upped my appreciation for the card.
I think that's completely fair. I think I've found it surprisingly good for what it is. Although there it's also enabling like your Wizard's Lightnings and other assorted things, but
that's true.
It's definitely better than we first gave it credit for. I still am not the biggest fan of it. I don't know. I think it just looks too much like Goblin Guide without actually being Goblin Guide, that I'm just off it. But all right, so Skewer the Critics has a potential home here. We have yet to see whether that's going to stand the test of time. We'll probably check back in on that one in a little bit, but let's talk about another red deck. So we could actually probably talk about 2 red decks if we really wanted to, because there's Red Deck Wins, which a while back was putting up some reasonable numbers. There's also Goblins. So these 2 lists are kind of nowhere to be seen. And Adrian, what are some of the possible like reasons as to why those decks kind of would have dried up out of the metagame?
So the reason for Goblins, I think, is because Goblins is actually not that fast of a deck. It's really more of like a semi-aggro deck, if that makes sense. Like, sure, it's playing 2/2s and stuff, but Sparksmith really encourages you to kind of grind a little bit. So I think it just gets outground by all these other great, better mid-range decks that are running around. Not that I would call it a true mid-range deck. So I think that's a reason right there. The reason I think you don't see RDW is really similar too. I think the mid-range decks are just too strong, and so they prey on aggro. And in fact, if you notice across the board, there's not really any aggro decks in the format anymore.
Yeah, like we have Stompy showing up at like a paltry 2 decks in the past like 8 weeks.
People are running main deck Prismatic Strands, and they just absolutely host decks like this.
Yeah, especially if they're monocolored, and we kind of have a format where multicolored aggro decks don't work super well.
And the reason Strands doesn't get burned as badly is because burn can play on the stack. If you Skewer the Critics for R on your turn and they Prismatic Strands, well, you just bolt them twice. You know, like it's so much easier for you to play around it.
Yeah, like you have an extra layer of an extra level that you can play on, right?
Right, exactly.
So with Goblins, I think the most interesting thing is that deck is almost completely dried up. Like that, I don't know. That was a deck that even when I started playing was not great, but it's really just fallen off the face of the earth at this point. Like I have not seen a Goblins list in what feels like months and months and months. One of the things we didn't talk about before sort of our midway break, Tron. How do you feel about Tron versus Burn? Because obviously while Tron is not doing the greatest in the current metagame, what are your thoughts on that as a matchup?
I think Tron probably has the tools it needs to beat Burn. I think there are going to be very slow Tron starts. Like if they just go like land, Prism, that seems like a tough game for them to win. but I think they have access to Pulse Marasa, which is probably pretty key, and they have access to Condescend, which is probably pretty good against Burn as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where Tron sometimes has games where it feels a little rickety just because you're trying to kind of not die for a while and not doing a whole ton of proactive stuff. And I also think like the Stonehorn Dignitary builds of Tron really suffer. And in fact, the moment I click in to see one of these lists, like it's running Circle of Protection Red in the sideboard. Like, I think people are very aware that this is not a favorable matchup for this deck. And I think it comes down to the fact that like in this list, I'm seeing Condescend, Prohibit. I'm seeing Pulse of Marasa, which yes, with Ghostly Flicker can kind of create a soft loop that lets you gain a whole ton of life. And I'm seeing Circle of Protection Red in the sideboard. And yes, the 3 Hydroblast, but it doesn't have a whole ton of ways to interact with it. And Tron also doesn't get the freebie of just being able to run as many gain lands as it can without being affected by it, really. So I don't know. I think Tron, at least to me, it doesn't feel like Tron has a favorable matchup in the form of Burn. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think you nailed it.
All right. So what have we covered so far? So we've talked about the matchup for the 3 main decks. We've talked about the inclusion of Skewer the Critics. Do you think that this is a 1 week, one-off thing, or do you think that Burn is going to be here until the metagame adjusts?
I kind of want to just write it off as a one-time thing where these decks probably had a pretty good run, the challenge was light. And also, I don't... There were some other weird ones in there, too. Didn't you say one of them was Boggles and one of them was, like, Is It Delver?
Yeah, Boggles is in there. Is It Delver showed up in 7th.
Like that's pretty unusual, too. Those decks are nowhere near the top of the leagues. And I also don't think Burn really has the tools it needs to win long multi-round formats all the time.
Yeah. I definitely think, like, as we mentioned, quote unquote coin flip deck, right? If you go from 5 to 6 rounds and you're 50-50 in some matchups, that means one less round where you're likely to see one of those kind of coin flip matchups. So
right.
I do think there's something to be said there. Now, if we don't see the numbers in the challenge sort of rebound after the Super Bowl weekend, I think we could be in for a little stay with Burn being a more relevant deck in the format for a while. Especially if the Boros players don't adapt to playing a little bit more life gain, and if Blue-Black Delver players don't figure out a way to somehow interact a little bit more positively with Burn in their favor. I could definitely see it becoming one of those decks that just keeps showing up.
Yeah, and I think people are always going to play it, and I think if enough people decide they're going to play it, it'll inevitably crack into the top 8.
Yeah, right. There's always kind of that snowball effect of, deck does well in challenge. People pick up deck because it did well in the last challenge. We see an increase from the last week. And then people start metagaming for it in week 3. And the numbers come back down. They swing in a different direction. A bunch of people start picking up whatever was winning last week. And you just kind of have this cyclical thing where we're rotating between a handful of decks being really good without ever settling into one. And I think the big thing right now is just the fact that it's kind of the same few decks rotating around between one another. Because, as we mentioned, like over the past 8 weeks, those 2 decks that we singled out as kind of the lead of the format, the real 2 pillars that are left standing, Blue-Black Delver and Kalatha or Boros decks as a whole make up what? Looking here, 30%. They make up almost half of the winning metagame. So even if we're changing between those 2, I don't think that makes this like a healthy format at the moment. It's just we're kind of ping-ponging between two different extremes, right?
Right. And I mean, we've talked about that a lot recently. The format, yeah, it could be doing better. So here's hoping things get shaken up pretty soon.
Yeah, we're really hoping for that. Although we do have the Mythic Championship qualifier, since they're no longer PTQs.
Yeah.
Now, do you think, like, not to tread on already trodden ground, but with all the talk of bans, do you think that Wizards is more or less likely to do that in the face of this big qualifier championship? Because if I'm not mistaken, this is a tournament that if you do well in, you get to go to a Pro Tour equivalent, right?
I think less. I think they're less likely to ban before then. They're probably going to wait for that event to see what happens. That's what they do with the Pro Tour as well, right?
Yeah.
Or do they ban right before the Pro Tour?
No. They've been going to the after the Pro Tour kind of thing for the most part, unless it's something really obvious where they know it'll be bad for quote unquote TV.
Right, and not that this is the Pro Tour or anything. I just think that Wizards has been traditionally pretty conservative with bans. Some outliers notwithstanding, like Energy and Kaladesh, where things are obviously a problem. But in my opinion, Wizards typically is very methodical when it comes time to ban a card.
Yeah, it's kind of in this weird position where if they ban something out of the format before this event takes place, you've got this big old scramble, right? People have to like figure out all of a sudden, like, oh god, my favorite deck got like nerfed. I need to figure out either what I can do to salvage this or what I need to pivot to in time for this tournament. So it's kind of an awkward position for them where if it's just going to be two decks, like, that's not going to be a great event, and might not give people a great impression of this format that they're trying actively to promote. But at the same time, bans right before an event are not a feel good. I mean,
right?
I'm sure you remember the response after Twin got banned out of Modern. Like,
people were very happy.
People were happy or furious. Like, I remember seeing multiple things on Reddit of people like burning their playsets of Twin. And
that's extreme.
It certainly is extreme, but like, people do take this game fairly seriously. So it's kind of a 6 of one, half a dozen in the other. If they think that the format needs to change and they change it, people aren't going to be happy. If they don't change it, other people aren't going to be happy. So
they can't win. Just ban the game. The game is banned.
Ban the game. Ban everything. Magic's illegal now. We have to.
Sorry, everyone.
We got to go to like the Street Fighter model of Pro Tour.
Hey, the Capcom Pro Tour is very well run.
Oh no, I'm talking about the in-game fictional universe of Street Fighter.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about like Liu Kang instead of Rich Hagen.
I see what you're saying.
Or just some bizarre Liu Kang. Is Liu Kang who's the bearded guy from Mortal Kombat?
I don't play Mortal Kombat, Mike. I don't know.
Shang Tsung? I'm not a fighting game guy either. People who like fighting games, just add us on Twitter. Tell me who the guy who runs the tournament in Mortal Kombat is. Just him.
Oh, I know who. I can picture the guy. I don't know his name.
Yeah, like just tell me his name so I can Google him and Photoshop Rich Hagen's face on him. Just do that for me. But we're drifting here. I think we're in an awkward position with our first like big time event. Like, this is our first time to kind of like show off and get a spot in the limelight, and as a result, Wizards might influence how they treat the banning process. But if things go completely sideways at this event and two decks show up and almost nothing else, it could, inform that decision. So we will have to wait and see. I am totally forgetting the date on that thing, because people should keep their eyes peeled. Just checking on this. It's Magic Fest LA and MFLA. Oh wow, that didn't actually show anything in Google. Great job, Wizards, on this rebrand.
Meh.
Magic Fest LA. Let's find out when this is for the folks at home. March 1st. So we have less than a month before this event. So hopefully folks make it out there. Hopefully folks get a chance to play this great format, and hopefully we'll be here to report on it when it happens. Do you have anything else tonight on the topic of Burn, the MCQ, or anything else?
Hey, stay sexy, San Diego.
Yeah, you do that, San Diego. That specific town that neither of us have ever lived in. Do that for us.
That's from Anchorman.
I know.
Oh.
You want to take us out of the show?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for joining us today. This podcast is brought to you by support of our patrons, including Jibby. Please consider supporting us just like them if you like the show. Check below this video for a description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you, for listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated as they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list, an idea for a topic, feel free to contact us either via our website or you can email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to my LGS Pat's Games, Mike's LGS JP Comics, and of course L. He does our theme song Quantitative. You can find that and other great tracks over at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike signing off for Color Commentary.